The trauma room went dead silent when Dr. Roland Mercer grabbed the young nurse by the front of her scrubs and shoved her hard into a steel supply cart. The crash of metal was still echoing off the tile walls when the man on the gurney, a big, scarred veteran with blood filling his chest cavity, reached up with a trembling hand and locked his fingers around the surgeon's wrist. His grip was iron. His voice, barely above a whisper, cut through the room like a blade. "You have no idea," he rasped, "who she really is." Nobody moved, nobody breathed. And in that moment, the quiet blonde nurse with the oversized scrubs and the calm, unreadable eyes did something no one in Crestline Regional Medical Center had ever seen her do. She looked directly at the surgeon and said, "Step aside. If this story has you hooked already, stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will leave you speechless." Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. This is a work of cinematic fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, institutions, and events are wholly invented. Crestline, Nevada was the kind of mid-sized desert city that looked fine on the outside and moved fast enough that nobody had time to look too closely at anything. The sprawl of it pressed up against the Red Rock foothills to the east, all strip malls and medical plazas and chain restaurants baking under a sun that never quite apologized for how hot it got. Crestline Regional Medical Center sat near the center of it, 8 floors of beige concrete and mirrored glass, a Level 2 trauma center that had been trying to get Level 1 certification for the past 4 years and kept falling just short. The nursing staff on the 3rd floor trauma bay knew the rhythms of the place like a second heartbeat. Shift change at 7, attending rounds at 9. Dr. Mercer usually blew through between 10 and noon with his entourage of residents and the particular energy of someone who expected walls to move out of his way. He was 46, board certified in trauma and surgical critical care, and he had a way of filling a room that made people unconsciously take a half step back. Not because he was physically imposing, he wasn't especially, but because his confidence had the weight of someone who had never, in his professional memory, been wrong. Nurse Jess Whitmore, who had worked 3rd floor for 11 years and seen 4 different department heads come and go, put it plainly one afternoon in the break room. "Mercer's not mean because he's having a bad day," Jess said, unwrapping a granola bar. "He's mean because he's decided that being mean is the same thing as being serious, and nobody's ever corrected him." The person she was talking to was sitting across the table with a half-eaten sandwich and a patient chart she was rereading for the 3rd time. She had light brown hair that she wore pulled back tight, pale blue eyes that didn't move much, and the general demeanor of someone who had learned long ago that the quietest person in the room usually understood the most. Her name was Nora Walsh. She was 29 years old. She had been working at Crestline Regional for 14 months. Nobody knew much about her. She had come in with solid references from a nursing agency out of Flagstaff, decent credentials, and the kind of interview presence that was competent without being memorable. She kept her head down, did her work, and had a habit of catching things, small clinical details, the kind that could spiral if you missed them, that her charge nurse Jess had noticed but never quite figured out how to categorize. "She's careful," Jess told the float pool coordinator once. Like, really careful. Like she's been somewhere where being wrong had a different consequence. That wasn't wrong. What nobody at Crestline Regional knew, what Nora had worked deliberately to make sure nobody knew, was that she had spent 6 years as an Army combat medic before her nursing license. Not a support role, not a base camp assignment. She had been embedded with special operations units in 3 different conflict zones, working conditions that had no clinical analog, making calls in the dark with her hands and whatever supplies she could carry in a pack. She had performed emergency procedures under fire that most attending physicians would hesitate to attempt in a sterile OR. She had kept people alive in circumstances that weren't supposed to be survivable. She had a combat medical badge and 2 commendations she kept in a box in the back of her closet. She was also, on this particular Tuesday morning in early October, 43 minutes into a 12-hour shift and already behind because the trauma bay had taken 3 ambulance arrivals in the first hour and a half. She was working through the 3rd patient, a 40-year-old construction worker named Dale Pruitt, who had a serious laceration to his forearm and a blood pressure that kept doing something strange, when she heard the doors bang open at the end of the corridor. "Walsh," that was Dr. Mercer's voice, flat and carrying. "Where is the chart for bed 7? She didn't look up from the blood pressure cuff. "On the rack outside the room, Dr. Mercer." "I don't see it." "It's there. Gray folder." A pause. The sound of someone picking up a folder. "This isn't current," he said. "Vitals were updated 40 minutes ago. I've been with Mr. Pruitt." There was a beat of silence that had a particular texture to it. The texture of someone deciding whether to let something go or make it into something. Mercer made his decision. "You're supposed to update charts between patients, not when you get around to it," he said, walking into the room now, residents trailing behind him. "That's not optional. That's basic." Nora finished recording the blood pressure. 94/60, which was low and getting lower. She made a note, reset the cuff, and turned toward the door with the chart in her hand. "You're right," she said. "I'll update it now." "Don't give me you'll do it now. It should be done." "Dr. Mercer, I have a BP concern on this patient I want to flag. Is he in arrest?" "No." "Is he in respiratory distress?" "No, but his pressures—" "Then it can wait 30 seconds for me to finish speaking." He took the chart from her hand in a way that wasn't quite snatching, but was close. One of the residents stared at the floor. "You have been here 14 months. I have been doing this for 20 years. When I speak, you listen. Clear?" "Clear," Nora said. Dale Pruitt was watching from the bed with the look of a man who felt bad about existing in this room right now. "She's been real good to me," he offered quietly. Nobody acknowledged him. Mercer spent 4 minutes with the chart, made 2 corrections she had, in fact already flagged internally, and left without mentioning Dale's blood pressure again. Nora caught Dr. Anita Reeves, one of the ER attendings who actually listened, in the hallway and flagged the concern. Reeves ordered a fluid bolus and a repeat panel. By noon, Dale Pruitt was in interventional radiology getting a small internal bleed addressed. He probably would have been fine without the catch. Probably. Probably was a word Nora Walsh had stopped relying on a long time ago. The weeks had a sameness to them. She worked her shifts, went home to a small apartment that faced the parking lot of a dry cleaner, ran in the mornings before the heat got serious, and kept largely to herself. She had one friend she would actually call a friend, a night shift tech named Ray Odom, who was 42, divorced, and the kind of person who made bad jokes at exactly the right moments. They ate lunch together on days their schedules overlapped and talked about everything except the things that actually mattered. Ray had once, early in their acquaintance, asked where she'd worked before Flagstaff. She'd said, "Around, healthcare staffing, you move a lot." He had nodded and not pushed, which was the moment she'd decided he was worth knowing. Dr. Roland Mercer was a recurring weather system in her professional life. Not every day, but often enough to be a pattern. He corrected her publicly on things she had correct. He interrupted her mid-sentence in front of patients. He had a habit of saying, "Let me explain something to you," before explaining things she already knew better than he did, and he delivered these explanations with the patient, deliberate cadence of someone teaching a child to tie their shoes. The other nurses had various responses to Mercer. Some had learned to be invisible when he was on the floor. Some deferred to him aggressively, making it theatrical, and he rewarded this. Jess Whitmore had developed a technique of quiet, precise documentation, everything dated and time-stamped. That was its own kind of armor. Nora's response was simpler. She absorbed it, registered it, and kept working. Her chart notes were meticulous. Her patient outcomes were consistently good. She had twice caught things that would have escalated badly if missed. She didn't mention either instance in any report, and neither did Mercer. "Doesn't it bother you?" Ray asked once. "What?" "The way he talks to you." She thought about it honestly for a moment. "I've been talked to worse." Ray looked at her sideways. "That's not reassuring." "I know." He let it sit for a second. "Worse like a bad attending during residency? Or worse like Ray?" "Got it," he said. "Never mind." There was a version of herself she kept in a locked room in the back of her mind. A self that had operated in environments where bad decisions had immediate and final consequences. That version of herself was methodical, controlled, and very good at not reacting until reaction was the only viable remaining option. Crestline Regional, even on its worst days, was not that. Dr. Mercer, even at his most contemptuous, was not that. She had been shot at in a narrow mountain valley in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map, with 3 wounded soldiers and no extraction window, and a med kit that was half depleted. She had made decisions in that valley that she still had not found language for. Roland Mercer's tone was not a threat. It was merely unpleasant. She could endure unpleasant. The Tuesday that changed everything started badly. A multi-vehicle accident on Interstate 15 had pushed 3 additional traumas to Crestline Regional, 2 of which were critical. By 7:15 a.m., the third-floor trauma bay was running at capacity, and the charge desk was managing 2 incoming ambulances simultaneously. Nora was triaging, which meant she was moving continuously. Vitals, assessments, verbal handoffs, documentation, back to vitals. The morning had the particular quality of controlled chaos that she was, without consciously recognizing it, very well suited to. She was at the nursing station updating a chart when the paramedic radio crackled. Crestline Regional, this is Unit 4. We are en route, approximately 6 minutes out. Single patient, male, mid-50s, MVC. Looks like a T-bone at highway speed. BP's tanking, GCS is 14 and dropping. Possible tib-fib fracture left leg, significant deformity. We've got some chest involvement, I think. Hard to assess. He's in and out. The charge nurse, Gail, pulled Nora and an ER tech named Marco and started prepping Bay 4. Mercer was already on the floor, which meant he would take the critical. Nora pulled the bay cart, checked the intubation setup, confirmed the crash cart was accessible, and had the room ready in 4 minutes. The paramedics came through the trauma bay doors at 7:31. The man on the gurney was large, broad-shouldered, built solid even beneath the torn shirt and cervical collar. He had short gray hair, a face that had seen weather and time, and a left leg that was visibly wrong below the knee. The deformity was obvious, the blood soaking through the emergency wrap substantial. There was road rash across the left side of his face, and what looked like impact bruising developing at the clavicle line. His eyes were partially open. He was conscious, barely, tracking movement but not coordinating well. His name, per his ID, which a paramedic pressed into Gail's hand, was Marcus Hale. Pressure's 85/50 and dropping, the paramedic said, her voice fast and clipped. Heart rate 108. Mechanism was a direct lateral impact driver's side at estimated 60+. Airbag deployed but delayed. Looks like a system fault. He was pinned for about 4 minutes. GCS dropped from 15 to 14 en route. Mercer swept in, took a single look at the leg, and moved straight to it. Get ortho on the phone. That leg needs the OR. Walsh, get a large bore IV and start fluids. Marco, I want X-ray in here now. Let's move. Nora started the IV on the right arm. Second attempt. The vein rolled, she adjusted, got it, while running her own eyes over the patient. The leg was bad, obviously bad, the kind of injury that drew the eye and held it. She understood that. Mercer was not wrong to focus there, but she was watching something else. Marcus Hale's breathing was off in a way that was subtle and specific. His respirations were slightly faster than the heart rate would fully account for. He was using his accessory muscles, just a little, just enough. His color on the left side of his chest was marginally worse than the right. She had to be close to see it, and she was close because she was placing the IV. When she pressed 2 fingers briefly against the left lateral chest, she felt what she wasn't supposed to feel. A slight paradoxical movement. A section of ribs that wasn't moving with the rest. She straightened. Dr. Mercer, his breath sounds are unequal. I think he may have a left-sided tension pneumo developing. His leg is the priority, Walsh. His BP is dropping, and it's not accounting for what I'd expect from the leg alone. The trajectory fits his leg has a femoral compromise pattern. That's what's dropping his pressure. I know what I'm looking at. So the mechanism was lateral impact, driver's side, high speed. The chest wall involvement is Walsh. Mercer turned from the leg just enough to give her a full look that was not ambiguous. I've told you how to behave in this room. Stand down. I'm asking you to listen to his chest. The room had gone to that particular stillness that happens when people stop moving and start watching. Marco had stopped where he was. Gail was very busy looking at her clipboard. The ER resident, a third year named Paul Adler, was staring at the vitals monitor with the focus of a man who wanted to be somewhere else. "I am not going to ask you again," Mercer said. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm giving you a clinical flag. His trachea may be deviating. If it is, we have seconds, not minutes. You're a nurse. You're not making clinical calls in my trauma room." She held his gaze. She kept her voice level because losing it would accomplish nothing, and she had spent 6 years in environments where losing it got people killed. "I am flagging what I'm observing. That's my job. You can dismiss it, but I'm flagging it." There were 3 seconds of silence. Then the monitor alarmed. Heart rate spiked to 130, then the rhythm began to degrade. Blood pressure flashed, 72/40. "He's crashing," Paul said, no longer interested in being invisible. And then Marcus Hale, who had been hovering at the edge of consciousness for the past several minutes, reached up and grabbed Roland Mercer's wrist. It was not a weak grab. It was not a confused, reflexive grab. It was the grip of a man who had trained his hands to do things, and even compromised, even at the edge, there was something functional and purposeful in it. Mercer actually flinched. Hale's eyes were open. He turned them toward Nora, not toward the surgeon. He looked at her for 1 full second with an expression that was not confusion, not fear, but a kind of recognition. The way one person who has been somewhere specific recognizes another person who has also been there. Then, his voice barely above a whisper, rough as gravel. "Listen to her." He released Mercer's wrist and went under. The monitor screamed, PEA on the left side of the display. The rhythm was deteriorating toward arrest. Mercer stood frozen for half a second too long. Nora did not. She moved to the left side of the bed, called for a 14-gauge needle by size and length without looking away from the chest, and had it in her hand before Marco fully processed the request. She found the second intercostal space at the mid-clavicular line by muscle memory. She had done this in the dark, in the rain, with her hand shaking, and she made the call. "Call it," she said to Paul. "Document it. Now." She decompressed the tension pneumothorax. The sound was immediate, a rush of air that confirmed everything. The monitor rhythm began to claw its way back. Heart rate dropped from the desperate upward spike. BP started climbing, 60, 70, 81/54 and rising. The room breathed. Paul was documenting. Marco was on the phone. Gail had already moved to the next intervention, and Roland Mercer, who had gone very still, said 4 words into the room's silence. "Get her out. Now." But it took a moment for anyone to understand what he meant. Then it became clear. He meant Nora. "Get security up here. She just performed an unauthorized procedure on my patient. That's it. She's done." Paul looked up from his documentation with an expression that was trying very hard to stay professional. "Dr. Mercer, the patient is stabilizing. I don't care if he's dancing. She is not credentialed to make that call, and she made it anyway." He turned to Jess, who had appeared in the doorway. "Call HR. I want her badge by end of shift. She's fired." Jess said nothing. She looked at Nora. Nora looked at Marcus Hale. His color was better. His rhythm was holding. He was still alive. She set down the needle, stripped her gloves, and walked to the side wall to begin her documentation. Her hands did not shake. Her voice when she spoke was directed at Paul. "Time of intervention, 7:47 a.m. Left-sided tension pneumothorax, confirmed by decompression response. Patient stabilized, all vitals trending upward." She looked at Paul. "Make sure that's accurate." "Walsh." Mercer's voice had the particular edge of someone who expected the world to reorganize itself around his anger. "I said you're done." "I know," she said. "I'm finishing my notes." Security arrived 7 minutes later. She didn't make them wait. She capped her pen, handed Jess the chart, and walked out of Bay 4 with the same unhurried, steady pace she had carried in. In the corridor, she stopped once and looked back through the window at the man on the bed, at the rise and fall of his chest, the oxygen numbers climbing toward normal, the monitor doing what it was supposed to do. Marcus Hale. She turned the name over. She hadn't seen him in more than 3 years. The last time she had, he had been on the other side of a radio call in conditions that she still wasn't fully authorized to describe. He had been a master sergeant then. She hadn't known what he'd been doing after, what he'd transitioned to, whether he'd stayed in, whether civilian life had taken hold. She hadn't known he was in Nevada. She hadn't known he would end up on her table. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind her, through the bay window, Marcus Hale's hand moved. Not much, not purposefully, just a small shift of fingers. But his eyes were open again, just barely, and they were tracking the corridor window with the faint, deliberate focus of a man whose brain was already working on something. What? They walked her through the motions with the particular impersonal efficiency of an institution protecting itself. A security guard named Todd, young, apologetic, clearly uncomfortable, accompanied her to the locker room to collect her personal items, then to the main HR office on the second floor, where a woman named Deborah, who had the careful composure of someone delivering bad news for a living, explained that a formal review was being initiated and that pending the outcome, Nora's access credentials were being suspended. "Is there anything you want to say for the record?" Deborah asked. "Yes," Nora said. The patient in Bay 4 presented with left-sided tension pneumothorax, secondary to blunt chest trauma consistent with the mechanism of injury. His BP was dropping below the threshold accounted for by the leg injury alone, his trachea was deviated, and he had paradoxical chest wall movement. Needle decompression was indicated on an emergency basis. He is alive because of the intervention. Deborah wrote this down with the expression of someone writing down something they know they will eventually have to hand to someone else to deal with. "And Dr. Mercer's conduct during the event?" she asked, neutrally. Nora looked at her. "That's in my documentation." She signed the forms they put in front of her. She returned her badge. She declined the offer of an employee assistance program pamphlet, which Deborah placed on the desk anyway. She thanked Todd, who said, "I'm really sorry about this," and looked like he meant it. She was out of the building by 9:15 a.m. The parking lot of Crestline Regional Medical Center stretched flat and bright under the desert sun. She sat in her car, a gray 10-year-old Honda that she kept mechanically sound if not aesthetically, and ran through the event in her head, not emotionally, clinically. She ran the timeline, the vitals, the decision point, the outcome. She was looking for the moment she had made an error. She ran it 3 times. She couldn't find one. She started the car and pulled toward the exit, and as she did, she noticed 2 things. A dark SUV parked near the ambulance bay that had no hospital markings, no medical insignia, and government plates. And a man standing beside it, with the particular posture of someone who had not come here for anything medical. He was looking directly at her car. She drove past him, keeping her speed even, watching him in the rearview mirror as she turned onto the main road. He was on his phone before she cleared the entrance. She didn't know who he was calling. She had a feeling, deep and quiet and not quite comfortable, that she knew who he was calling about. Marcus Hale hadn't had an accident. That wasn't a thought she could fully support yet. But she'd spent enough time in environments where accidents were sometimes something else to recognize the shape of that possibility when it moved past her. She drove home. She kept both hands on the wheel and her speed exactly at the limit, and her eyes moving between the road ahead and the rearview mirror at regular intervals. The shape of that possibility followed her the whole way. She had been home for 2 hours, long enough to change out of her scrubs, make coffee that she hadn't actually drunk, and sit at her kitchen table staring at nothing. When her phone rang. Unknown number. Nevada area code, but the prefix was not one she recognized. She picked up on the second ring. "Nora Walsh," said the voice on the other end. It was male, measured, and had the particular quality of someone who was used to using radio communications. He spoke with a clarity that wasn't quite civilian. "This is a courtesy call. You've been identified." She said nothing for a moment, then, "Who is this?" "Someone who was aware of the situation this morning and is now more interested in it." A pause. "What you did for Master Sergeant Hale this morning kept a very specific situation from becoming significantly worse. I did what the clinical picture required. We know. That's the point." Another pause. "You should probably know that what happened on Interstate 15 this morning is being treated as a targeted event. The crash was not accidental." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly. "Is he secure?" she asked. "For the moment. His situation is being managed." The voice on the phone had a careful, deliberate quality now. Your situation is also being assessed. There are people who are interested in the fact that you were the one in that room this morning. What does that mean? It means that the next several hours are going to be more complicated than your morning already was. I would recommend you stay available. The line went dead. She set the phone on the table, picked up the coffee she hadn't drunk, looked at it, set it back down. Somewhere across the city, in Bay 4 at Crestline Regional, Marcus Hale was lying in a hospital bed with a chest tube and a repaired femur and people around him that she didn't know, and at least one person in a dark SUV in the parking lot who almost certainly knew exactly how that crash had happened. And somewhere in that same building, Roland Mercer was filing paperwork to make sure she never worked in clinical medicine again. She stood up from the table, went to the window, looked out at the flat expanse of the parking lot below. The dry cleaner, a woman loading bags into her car, a kid on a bike taking a shortcut through the lot. Normal. Ordinary. The surface of a Tuesday afternoon in Crestline, Nevada. She had been in enough places that looked like that right before they stopped looking like that. She went to her closet. In the very back, on the high shelf behind a row of folded towels, was a plain gray box. She hadn't opened it in 14 months. She pulled it down, set it on the bed, and looked at it for a moment without opening it. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Ray. Heard what happened. You okay? She typed back. Fine, don't worry about it. 3 seconds later, you sure? Because Jess said Mercer was... Ray. I'm fine. I'll explain later. She set the phone down and looked at the box again. She was almost certainly not going to be left alone. She understood that clearly. The question was what shape the not being left alone was going to take, and how quickly it was going to arrive, and whether the people coming would be on the side she hoped they were on. These were unknowns. She had operated with unknowns before. She put the box back on the shelf. She wasn't going to need what was in it. Not yet. But she left the closet door open. The closet door stayed open for the rest of the afternoon. She didn't touch the box again. She moved around the apartment with the careful, contained energy of someone who had learned that preparation and panic looked almost identical from the outside, and that the difference was entirely internal. She drank the cold coffee. She made a list on a notepad, not of things she felt, but of things she knew. Facts, in order. The crash, the intervention, the firing, the SUV, the call. She wrote them in the kind of shorthand that was second nature to her, and then sat and looked at the list for a while, not reading it so much as letting it settle into a shape. What she knew, Marcus Hale was alive because she had been in that room. What she didn't know, almost everything else. At 4:17 p.m., her phone rang again. Different unknown number. She picked up. Is this Nora Walsh? The voice was female this time, brisk and official, with the slight vocal compression of someone on a secure line. Former specialist, 75th Medical Brigade, attached personnel. Her hand tightened on the phone. Not much. Enough. That's not information I've shared with Crestline Regional Medical Center. We know. That's why I'm calling you on this number and not the one in your hospital file. A brief pause. My name is Agent Dana Frick. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Organized Crime and Racketeering Division out of Las Vegas Field Office. Are you somewhere private? Yes? Good. I'll keep this short because we're still in active assessment mode and I can't give you everything yet. Marcus Hale is a cooperating federal witness. He has been cooperating with our office for 7 months on a matter I cannot specify on this line. The crash this morning was not random. We are operating under the working assumption that his location was compromised, his route was known, and the vehicle that struck him was not there by accident. Nora was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sun was dropping behind the ridge of low buildings to the west, the kind of desert late afternoon that turned everything a flat copper color. Is he still at Crestline Regional? She asked. For now, we are evaluating relocation. His medical status is complicating the timeline. Another pause. We are also aware of what happened in the trauma bay this morning. We have a statement from the ER resident, Dr. Adler, and from a technician named Marco Reyes. You are not under investigation for anything. I didn't think I was. I know. I'm telling you anyway because the hospital is apparently moving forward with a formal complaint, and we want you to be aware that our office considers your intervention medically necessary and will say so in any proceeding where it becomes relevant. Frick's voice shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more direct. Mr. Hale is asking about you, specifically. He's been in and out since surgery, but when he's out, it's your name. Nora looked at the notepad on her kitchen table, the list of things she knew. Tell him I'm fine, she said. I will. A beat. Ms. Walsh, stay available. We may need to speak again. I'll be here. The line went quiet. She set the phone down and sat with the information for a while, arranging it next to what she already had. A federal witness. 7 months cooperating. A crash that wasn't a crash. And Marcus Hale, somewhere in a hospital she was no longer allowed to enter, asking for her by name. She had last seen him 3 years and 4 months ago. She had been in the back of a logistics truck in the dark with 2 soldiers who were in worse condition than either of them had any right to be. And Marcus Hale had come through a checkpoint she hadn't expected to still be active and looked at her and the 2 men she was holding together with fieldcraft and stubbornness and said, "Good work, specialist. Get on." She had not felt, in that moment, that she had done good work. She had felt that she had done what needed doing because the alternative was not available. That was the only relationship she had ever had with her own competence. It existed because it had to, not because she had chosen it. She had not told him thank you. She had gotten on. Thoughts. By 7 p.m., it was clear she wasn't going to sleep. She made food that she ate standing at the counter. Rice, some leftover chicken, food as function rather than pleasure, and tried to think through the shape of what came next. The hospital's formal complaint would move through HR and potentially the state nursing board. The timeline for that kind of review was usually weeks, sometimes longer, but it would require her to respond, document, and present her case. She would need her own documentation solid. She would need to talk to someone, not a lawyer yet maybe, but close. She was working through that when the second text from Ray came in. Nora, I'm not trying to push, but Jess called me. She said Mercer is requesting a full termination for cause, and the hospital is letting him lead the review. That means the panel is going to be stacked. You need to know. She read it twice. Then she called him. He picked up on the first ring. Hey, tell me what Jess said exactly. Ray was quiet for a second, not stalling. He was the kind of person who organized his thoughts before he spoke, which she had always found reassuring. Mercer went straight to Dr. Haskell after the incident. Haskell's the chief of medical staff. You know who he is. I know. He told Haskell that you physically interfered in an active trauma, that you refused direct orders from the attending, and that your intervention, his words, created unnecessary risk during a stabilization procedure. She was quiet. Nora, I'm here. He's calling the needle decompression unauthorized and premature. He's saying the patient was already being managed and your intervention introduced. Ray stopped. She could hear him taking a breath. He's saying you caused the deterioration, that your actions created the cardiac event. The refrigerator hummed. The copper light outside the window was gone now, replaced by the flat early dark of desert evenings. That's not what the monitor data shows, she said. I know that, but Mercer has the attending authority and the institutional relationship, and Haskell has been covering for him for 2 years at least. Jess has documentation on that going back to Ray. Does Jess still have that documentation? Yes. She needs to keep it somewhere that isn't the hospital server. A pause. Yeah. Okay. I'll tell her. He waited a beat. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, she said. It was honest. She rarely said things she didn't mean. I'm working on it. If there's anything, I know. Thank you. She hung up and stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand, and for the first time since 9:15 that morning, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel moved through her, and she let it, briefly, before she put it back where she kept things like that. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the particular exhaustion of being in a situation that was wrong in every direction. Wrong that the patient had nearly died because a surgeon couldn't hear a warning. Wrong that she was the one standing outside the building. Wrong that the person doing the most damage was operating from a position of institutional protection. She had seen that pattern before. In different contexts, different stakes, but the structure was the same. someone with authority using it as a lid to press down on truth. She had never been good at watching that happen without pushing back. It had gotten her into trouble before, in and out of uniform. She looked at the closet door, still open. She was at her kitchen table with the notepad and a second cup of coffee, this one actually hot, when her phone buzzed at 9:43 p.m. Not a call. A text from a number she didn't recognize but that had a 472 prefix she associated distantly with government communications infrastructure. Crestline Regional, ICU, Room 14, security cleared 10:30 p.m. Ask for Vasquez. She looked at the text for a long moment. Then she looked at the time. Then she got up, went to the closet, and changed her clothes. She was not at this point an employee of Crestline Regional Medical Center. She had no badge, no credentials, no clinical standing on those premises. What she had was a text from a source she couldn't verify and a decision to make. She made it. At 10:26 p.m., the main lobby of Crestline Regional was operating at its nighttime reduced capacity. Overhead lighting dimmed, the main desk staffed by a single administrative clerk who was on the phone, 2 visitors in the waiting area chairs. Nora walked through the automatic doors with the purposeful pace of someone who belonged there, which was, she had learned, almost indistinguishable from actually belonging there. She went to the elevator, took it to the 4th floor where the ICU was, and found a woman standing outside the elevator bank who was not in scrubs and not in patient attire, and who had the upright, economical posture of someone with a specific function. "Vasquez?" Nora said. "Walsh." The woman, mid-30s, dark hair, a jacket that fit well enough to obscure what was under it, nodded once. "This way." She led her down the ICU corridor past the nursing station, where the night nurse looked up, clocked Vasquez with a recognition that was clearly pre-established, and looked back at her screen, to room 14. The door was mostly closed. Through the window, Nora could see the glow of monitors and the shape of a bed. Vasquez stopped at the door. "He's been lucid since about 8. He's on enough pain management that there are gaps, but he's tracking." She paused. "He told us your call sign." Nora looked at her. "What?" "Your operational call sign. From the 3rd deployment. He said if you weren't sure whether to trust the text, I should tell you that he still has the letter you wrote to Corporal Duarte's family, and he thought it was the best thing anyone put on paper in those 18 months. Vasquez's expression was professional, but not unkind. "He wanted to make sure you'd come." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she pushed the door open. The room had the particular quality of ICU spaces at night, the sounds organized, the light deliberate, the hum of machinery that translated a human body into data points on screens. Marcus Hale was in the bed with a chest tube and an external fixator on the leg and an IV line running into his right arm, and he looked like a man who had been in a serious car accident, which he had. His color was better than it had been in the trauma bay. His breathing was even. His eyes were open, and when she came through the door, they tracked to her immediately with a quality of focus that was not sedation blurred. "Hey, specialist," he said. His voice was rough, lower than she remembered. "It's just nurse now," she said. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat beside the bed, close enough to speak quietly. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone hit me with a car." He paused. "Because someone did." His eyes moved over her face with the careful attention of someone reading a situation. "They told me what happened in the trauma bay. You were conscious for part of it. Enough of it." He shifted slightly, wincing at something in his left side. "The surgeon. Mercer. He was going to let me die because he didn't want to be corrected by a nurse." She didn't say anything to that. "Nora. Marcus. Thank you." He said it plainly, without inflation, the way she had always respected, the way people said things when they meant them rather than when they wanted credit for meaning them. "Third time." She shook her head. "Second. You're forgetting the radio call in. That doesn't count. I wasn't even there in person." His mouth moved into something that was almost a smile. "It counts." They sat for a moment in the organized dark of the room, the monitors steady, the rest of the floor quiet. Then his expression changed. The brief window of something ordinary closing back into something more serious. They got to my location, he said.
Someone told them where I'd be and when. I've been running through it and the window is narrow. It's either a leak inside the operation or... He stopped. You don't know what the operation is. Agent Frick called me. She gave me the broad outline. Frick's solid. He shifted again, and this time she could see it cost him more. There are people who need me to not testify. I've been aware of that for 6 months. I've been careful. And they still found me. His eyes were very steady. Which means careful isn't going to be enough anymore. What does that mean practically? It means the next few days are going to be complicated. He looked at her. And it means that someone is going to realize, if they haven't already, that the nurse who saved my life this morning is the same person who kept 3 soldiers alive in a valley in Don't. He stopped. Don't finish that sentence in a room with monitoring equipment, she said quietly. He almost smiled again. Some things don't change. Some things shouldn't. She leaned forward slightly. Marcus, what do you need from me? He thought about that seriously, the way he had always thought about things. Not quickly, but completely. Right now? Nothing. The FBI has the room covered. Frick is handling security protocol. He paused. But I want you to know what you're in the middle of, because being in the middle of it is already decided. That happened this morning in the trauma bay. The question is whether you know it or not. I'd rather know it. Yeah. He exhaled carefully, a managed breath that told her the chest tube was uncomfortable in the specific way chest tubes always were. What they're after, what I've been cooperating on, it's not small. There's a procurement network. Medical supply contracts, military and civilian, falsified quality certifications, inflated billing, equipment that doesn't meet spec and sometimes doesn't work at all. It runs through 6 states and the money is significant. Who's running it? That's what I'm testifying to. His voice was flat. The crash today was meant to make sure I don't get to. The monitors kept their steady rhythm. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. There's something else, he said. She waited. One of the names in the network, one of the peripheral connections, someone who was handling a piece of the billing operation. There's a financial connection to Crestline Regional, specifically to a procurement officer and at least one physician on staff. He watched her face. I don't know who. Frick's team is still building that part. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Something cold and specific moved through her that was not surprise, not quite, but was close. A physician, she said. I don't have a name. I want to be clear about that. I only know the structure, not the individual. He paused. But it's possible that what happened to you today, the firing, the formal complaint, it's possible it's not entirely about a surgeon's ego. She sat with that, turned it over carefully, because it was the kind of thought that needed to be handled carefully, or it ran away into territory that wasn't supported by evidence. Or it could be exactly what it looks like, she said. A surgeon who doesn't like being corrected. It could be. I'm not going to assume a connection that isn't established. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to know the possibility exists. His eyes didn't move from hers. I'm asking you to be careful, Nora. The same kind of careful you were when careful mattered. She nodded slowly. Okay. They talked for another 20 minutes, carefully and specifically, covering the things that needed to be covered. She asked about the operation in medical terms, what he had been told about his recovery window, what the surgical team had said, whether there were complications she should know about. He answered with the direct practicality of someone who had spent years in environments where accurate medical communication was survival. She filed everything and cross-referenced it against what she had seen in the trauma bay and what she knew about this kind of injury. When she stood to go, he said, "You still running mornings?" She stopped. "How did you know I was running?" "You always ran. It's how you processed." He looked at her steadily. "Take a different route for a while." She looked back at him. "Get some sleep, Marcus." She left the room, walked past Vasquez with a nod, and took the elevator back down. In the lobby, she passed the administrative desk without looking at it and went out through the automatic doors into the desert night. The parking lot was mostly empty. The dark SUV from the morning was gone, or replaced. There was a different one now,
parked at the far end near the emergency bay with its lights off. She didn't stare at it. She noted it and moved to her car and sat inside for a moment before starting the engine. A physician on staff, a financial connection to Crestline Regional. She started the engine and pulled out of the lot. She was 3 blocks from the hospital, waiting at a red light, when she noticed the headlights behind her. They had been there since she pulled out of the parking lot. She made a right turn, then a left that wasn't toward her apartment, then another right. The headlights stayed with her. Not close, not obviously, but staying. She didn't accelerate. She drove at exactly the speed limit and made one more turn, then another, running a mental map of the streets, and the headlights stayed. She pulled her phone from the center console and called the number Agent Frick had called from. It rang twice. Frick, this is Walsh. I just left the hospital. I have a vehicle that has been behind me for 4 turns. Dark-colored sedan, can't confirm the plate from here. A beat. Can you get to a lit commercial area and stay mobile? Yes. Do that. I'm going to have someone reach you and... Frick covered the phone briefly, spoke to someone, came back. 11 minutes. Silver pickup, Nevada plates. Will pull beside you and flash twice. Got it. She turned onto a commercial strip. A late-night pharmacy, a fast food place still open, gas stations burning white light into the dark, and kept moving slowly, staying in the lit corridor. The dark sedan made the turn behind her. Still hanging back, still there. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her breathing was deliberate. She was running the same internal calibration she had run in other vehicles in utter darkness. The one that sorted information from noise and kept the reaction available, but held it, waiting for the moment when it was actually needed. The silver pickup appeared at a cross street, pulled alongside her at the next light, and flashed its headlights twice. She made a left. The pickup made a left behind her. The dark sedan did not make the left. She let out a breath that was quiet and even, and kept driving, and when her heart rate dropped back to something manageable, she allowed herself to notice that it had elevated at all. She cataloged it without judgment. Normal. Appropriate response to a real stimulus. What was not normal was the next call she got. 2 minutes later, from a number she did not recognize, with a voice she had never heard before. "Ms. Walsh?" said the voice. Male, calm, with the specific flatness of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say and had not rehearsed an emotion to go with it. You should consider carefully what information you choose to share with federal agents. People who become too interesting to ongoing investigations have a way of becoming problems. Problems have solutions. The call ended. She held the phone in her right hand and kept driving with her left, and she did not let the pickup behind her out of her rearview mirror, and she did not allow herself to feel the full weight of what that call meant until she was somewhere safe. Because it meant several things, all of them arriving at once. It meant she was already known to someone outside the hospital. It meant someone had her cell phone number that she had never given to Crestline Regional Medical Center. And it meant that whatever Marcus Hale had said about the possibility of the firing not being entirely about a surgeon's ego, that possibility had just moved considerably closer to a probability. She pressed the gas slightly, keeping pace with the pickup, and stared at the road ahead, and her mind was doing the thing it did under pressure. Sorting, ordering, building the architecture of what she knew and what she needed to know and what she was going to do about it, in sequence, without panic, without wasted motion. The silver pickup's brake lights came on at an intersection. Behind them both, somewhere in the normal traffic of a Nevada night, a dark sedan was parked at a turn they hadn't taken. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital room with steady monitors and a chest tube and federal protection that was good but not perfect, Marcus Hale was lying awake doing the same thing she was doing, building the architecture, figuring out who had gotten to his location. And Nora Walsh, who had spent years being invisible, who had built a quiet life specifically designed to keep her off every radar that mattered, was beginning to understand, with the cold clarity of someone who had been here before, that the quiet was over. The silver pickup led her to a parking structure off Benton Avenue, 4 levels, mostly empty at this hour, the kind of place that existed in every mid-sized city and meant nothing to anyone until it meant something. She pulled into the 3rd level, and the pickup parked 2 spaces down, and a man got out who was not in uniform but moved like someone who had worn one for a long time. He was maybe 50, compact,
with a face that had spent time outdoors in conditions that weren't recreational. He walked to her driver's side window, and she rolled it down, and he held up a credential wallet without being asked. "Special Agent Doyle, FBI Las Vegas, Frick sent me." He looked at her with the flat, assessing quality of someone who evaluated people for a living. "You said 4 turns. 4 confirmed. Lost it after you came in. We picked it up. Nevada plates, registered to a shell company out of Henderson. We're running it." He put the wallet away. "You want to tell me about the call?" She recited it verbatim. She had a good memory, trained, not natural, honed over years of environments where accurate recall was not optional. Doyle listened without interrupting and then stood quietly for a moment after she finished. "They had your number," he said. "A number I've never given to Crestline Regional or any affiliated system." He nodded slowly. "That's the part that matters." He looked at the concrete wall ahead of them. "Someone ran you, background, contact information. That takes either resources or access to the right databases, and it was done fast. You were identified this morning, and they had your number by tonight." Which tells you something about who they are. It tells us something about what they have access to. He looked back at her. "Ms. Walsh, we have a situation that is moving faster than our timeline allowed for. Hale's testimony was scheduled for 12 days out. What happened today compressed that significantly, and there are decisions being made at a level above my pay grade about how to proceed." He paused. "What I can tell you is that you are now a known quantity to the people we are investigating, and that changes your exposure profile." "I understand that. Do you have somewhere you can go tonight that isn't your apartment?" She thought about it honestly. "I can find somewhere." "Do that." He handed her a card. Plain, just a number, no name. "If anything else comes in, any contact, any vehicle, anything that feels wrong, you call that, day or night." She took the card. "What about the hospital's complaint against me? The board review?" Something moved across Doyle's face that wasn't quite a wince, but was adjacent to it. "That's a civil matter. We can't stop it from proceeding. What we can do is make sure the relevant people are aware of our interest in the overall situation when the time is right." He looked at her steadily. "Right now, tonight, I need you to focus on the thing that is immediately dangerous rather than the thing that is professionally damaging. Can you do that?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes." "Good." He stepped back from the window. "Take the long way wherever you're going. We'll have eyes on you for the next hour." She rolled the window up and sat in the concrete quiet of the parking structure and let herself have 30 seconds of nothing. No processing, no planning, just the sensation of the steering wheel under her hands and the ambient hum of the city outside the walls. 30 seconds was usually enough. Tonight it was close. Then she started the car and drove. Ray Odom lived in a rental house on the east side with a yard that he had given up on and a garage that he used for everything except cars. She called him from a gas station 2 miles from the parking structure, standing outside in the warm night air with her back to the building and her eyes on the street. "I need a couch," she said. A pause. "Nora, what's going on?" "I'll explain when I get there. Don't open the door until you see my face." Another pause, shorter. "Okay." He didn't ask anything else, which was why she'd called him. She bought a bottle of water inside, drove to his house on a route that took 11 minutes longer than necessary, and when she got there, the porch light was on and Ray was in the doorway before she reached the steps. He looked at her face and stepped back without speaking to let her in. The house was the way it always was, lived in, not dirty, with the specific quality of a space occupied by a person who had stopped trying to make it look like anything in particular. There were books on the coffee table and a half-assembled bicycle component in the corner of the living room, and a cat named Fulton, who appeared from somewhere, assessed Nora with the brief attention of an animal who has seen enough and left. "Sit down," Ray said. "I'm fine standing for a minute." "Then I'll sit." He did, on the arm of the couch, and looked at her. "Start wherever." She told him the necessary parts. Not all of it. There were pieces that weren't hers to share, operational details that Agent Frick had not cleared her to discuss. But the shape of it. The patient's identity, the federal connection, the car that had followed her, the call. She kept it linear and factual because that was how she processed things, and also because Ray absorbed information better that way. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The call, he said. That's a threat. Yes. From someone who knows who you are and where you live. Effectively, he looked at the middle distance for a moment. Then, okay, the couch is yours. I'll get sheets. He stood up. And Nora, the board review. Jess called me again an hour ago. Mercer submitted his formal statement today. She had half expected that. She still felt it land with a particular weight. And he's claiming the tension pneumo was already being managed, that the cardiac event was secondary to your intervention, not primary to the untreated injury. Ray's voice was careful. He filed it fast, like it was already written. She thought about that. A formal statement filed within hours of the incident, already detailed, already argued. That took either institutional support or preparation, and the difference between those two things mattered considerably. He'll need the monitor data to support that, she said. The timestamp on the deterioration is in the record. Jess has a copy. She sent it to herself from the system this afternoon. Tell her to keep it somewhere the hospital can't reach. Already told her. He paused in the doorway. The thing is, the way Mercer moved on this, the speed of it, does that fit with what the FBI said? About a connection? She had been trying not to connect those two things prematurely. The discipline of keeping inference separate from evidence was something she had trained hard. But Ray was not wrong that the speed was notable. I don't know yet, she said, but you think it might. I think I don't have enough to know, and I'm not going to pretend I do. She looked at him. Ray, the less you're in the middle of this, the better. I'm already in the middle of it. You're standing in my living room. He said it without drama. Get some sleep. She didn't sleep much. She lay on the couch in the dark and ran the architecture in her head, the structure of what was known, what was inferred, what was missing, until around 3 a.m., when her brain finally stopped generating new iterations, and she dropped into something shallow and fitful for a few hours. She woke at 6:15 to the sound of her phone. Frick. Where are you? Frick's voice had a different quality than it had the night before, compressed in a way that was not about line security. Safe location. What happened? Hale's room was accessed at 4:40 a.m. A staff member, orderly, ID'd as a hospital employee, badge checked clean, entered on a routine rounds pretext and was intercepted by one of my agents before he reached the bed. A beat. The badge was cloned. The real employee was home asleep. It took us 11 minutes to establish that. Nora sat up. Is Hale? He's fine. The agent had the room covered. But this is the second attempt in 22 hours, and whoever is running this operation has hospital system access good enough to clone a working staff badge. Frick's voice was even, but the pace of it was faster than usual. We're moving him. Relocation is happening in the next 3 hours. After that, his location is need to know only. What do you need from me? Right now, nothing. Stay where you are. Stay off the hospital's grid. A pause that was slightly longer than necessary. There's something else. Our financial forensics team worked through the night on the Crestline regional connection Hale identified. We've been building this thread for 6 weeks, and last night we got enough to act on. Nora waited. The procurement link runs through a billing administrator at the hospital named Stuart Vance, and Frick paused with the careful quality of someone who knew the weight of what they were about to say. A physician, Dr. Roland Mercer. The room was very quiet. How deep? Nora asked. Deep enough. We're talking about 18 months of falsified equipment quality certifications, 7 figures in fraudulent billing on surgical supply contracts, and at least 3 procurement decisions that resulted in substandard equipment being used in active surgical procedures. Frick's voice had lost whatever professional distance it usually carried. 2 post-surgical complications in the past 8 months may be connected to equipment failure. We're still building that piece. Nora sat with that for a moment. A surgeon who had spent 18 months falsifying equipment certifications, billing fraud, and possibly, contributing to patient complications through substandard gear, and who had, yesterday morning, attempted to prevent a nurse from saving a federal witness's life, then moved with remarkable speed to file a detailed formal complaint against her. The inference that she had been holding at arm's length moved steadily and with evidence into the territory of probability.
The formal complaint he filed against me, she said. We're aware of it. Frick's voice was flat. I want to be careful here because we do not have evidence that the complaint was filed for reasons other than what it appears to be. Mercer may be protecting his ego and his procurement fraud simultaneously. Those don't have to be connected. A pause. But we are aware of the timing and we are documenting it. What happens now? We go to the U.S. Attorney's Office today with what we have. Warrants for Mercer and Vance, hospital record subpoena, full scope. Frick paused again. Which means by end of day, there are going to be federal agents in Crestline Regional Medical Center executing search warrants, and the institution is going to know that the surgeon who fired a nurse yesterday morning is being arrested on federal fraud charges. Nora absorbed that. The order of it, the institutional consequences, the specific reversal of where the weight had been yesterday morning versus where it would be by tonight. Ms. Walsh, Frick said, for what it's worth, and I know this doesn't fix what happened yesterday, what you did in that trauma bay did not just save a patient. It kept our primary witness alive at a moment when our entire case almost collapsed. She paused. I'll be in touch. The call ended. Nora set the phone down and sat in Ray's living room in the early morning light, and Fulton the cat appeared from wherever cats went and sat a careful distance away and regarded her with the specific disinterest of an animal who had no investment in the situation. She looked at the clock. 6:23 a.m. Somewhere across the city, federal agents were preparing warrants. Somewhere in Crestline Regional, on a floor she was no longer authorized to access with a badge she no longer had, Roland Mercer was beginning his morning rounds with no knowledge of what the next several hours would bring. And somewhere, relocated, secured, location known only to a narrow list of people, Marcus Hale was waiting on a recovery timeline and a testimony date and whatever came next. She got up, went to Ray's kitchen, and started the coffee. She heard him moving around in the back of the house. He was an early riser, always had been. And a minute later he appeared in the doorway in yesterday's clothes, with his hair doing something that suggested an uneasy night. Coffee, he said. Almost. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at her with the careful attention of someone who is reading a situation rather than asking about it. Then, something happened. Several things. She watched the coffee brew. Ray, there's going to be news today about the hospital. About Mercer. She turned around. I need you to hear it from me first so it doesn't catch you sideways. He was very still. Tell me. She told him what Frick had cleared her to share, which was the broad structure of it. The procurement fraud, the federal warrants, the timeline. She kept Hale's name out of it and left the witness testimony context vague. Ray listened with his hands flat on the table and his face doing the work of absorbing something that was rearranging his understanding of a place he'd worked for 7 years. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. The equipment, he said finally. The substandard equipment, the complications. They're still building that piece. There was a patient in January, post-op, 4 days out, staple failure on an abdominal closure. We couldn't figure out why. The surgeon, not Mercer, different attending, he was convinced the stapler had malfunctioned. Ray's voice was careful and controlled in the way of someone managing anger at an appropriate distance. They reviewed the device and the manufacturer said it was within spec. Patient spent 11 extra days in the hospital. Nora looked at him. I'm going to need to give a statement, he said. It wasn't a question. Probably, not today. He nodded. Got up, poured the coffee when the machine finished, and set a cup in front of her. They drank in silence for a moment. Then her phone buzzed. Not Frick, not Doyle. An unknown number with an area code she didn't recognize. Not Nevada, not Arizona, something she'd seen before in a different context. She stared at it for a second. She picked up. Walsh. The voice on the other end was male, older, with the particular cadence of someone who had spent decades in command structures. This is Colonel James Whitaker, Army Medical Command. I'm calling at the request of the Secretary of the Army's office. A pause. There's a briefing happening at Crestline Regional Medical Center at 9 a.m. today. Hospital administration, federal agents, military liaisons. Your presence has been requested. She set the coffee cup down. Requested by whom? By the office of the Secretary of the Army. Another pause, briefer. And by Master Sergeant Marcus Hale, who was quite specific about it. Nora looked at Ray. He was watching her with the expression of someone who had understood from her face that something had shifted. "I'll be there," she said. She ended the call, picked up the coffee, and then her phone buzzed again. This time a news alert pushed from the local Crestline news station, whose notification she had never signed up for, and whose alert had arrived on a device with a number she had never given to Crestline Regional. The alert read, "Breaking. Federal agents arrive at Crestline Regional Medical Center. Hospital placed on administrative hold. Multiple sources report arrest." Nora stared at the notification. The timestamp on the alert was 6:41 a.m. The warrants weren't supposed to execute until end of day. Something had changed. She stood up fast enough that the chair scraped and Ray was on his feet a half second behind her, and she was already dialing Frick when the second alert pushed through. Not from the news station this time, but from a number she didn't recognize, a text with no sender name, 4 words that hit the screen and stopped everything. "They're not there for Mercer." Frick picked up on the first ring. "I was about to call you," Frick said, and the compression in her voice was not managed the way it had been 20 minutes ago. Something had moved, and it had moved fast. "Where are you?" "Off-site, safe. What's happening at the hospital?" "Stand by." The sound of movement, a door, voices in the background being cut off. Then Frick came back, closer to the phone. At approximately 5:50 a.m., our surveillance team outside the hospital flagged a vehicle. Different from the sedan last night, different plates, also clean on the surface. It was parked in the physician lot for 40 minutes without movement. When our team ran the plate, it came back to a logistics company in Phoenix that our financial forensics flagged 2 weeks ago as a shell entity connected to the procurement network. Nora's hand tightened on the phone. "That's not a coincidence." "No, we pulled the hospital's internal security feed, the ones the administration doesn't know we have access to. And we identified 2 individuals who entered through the physician entrance at 5:38 a.m. using valid staff credentials. Not cloned this time. Valid. As in, someone with active legitimate access let them in or gave them the codes." "Someone inside." "Yes. We have people at the building now doing a soft entry. We don't want to spook whoever's in there until we know where they are and what they're doing. The hard entry teams are staged." A pause. "Nora, these individuals, based on the build and movement patterns on the security footage, our team lead described their entry profile as tactical, not hospital workers, not administrators." The kitchen was very still. Ray was standing by the counter, not moving, reading her face. "Are there patients in the building?" she asked. "Full morning population. Shift change happened at 7. The ICU is operational." Another pause with weight behind it. "Hale's relocation was completed at 5 a.m. He is not in the building, but his room, room 14, is still showing as occupied in the hospital system. We haven't updated the record." Nora understood immediately. The hospital's internal record still showed Marcus Hale in room 14. Anyone with access to that system, including someone who had been inside the procurement network for 18 months, would see an occupied room. "They think he's still there," she said. "That's our working assumption, which gives us a window, but it's not a wide one. Once they access the room and find it empty, the window closes and we lose any advantage we have." Frick's voice was very direct now. "The 9 a.m. briefing is still happening. Colonel Whitaker is already at the building. He arrived with a military liaison team 20 minutes ago, and they are coordinating with our agents on the ground. I need you there, but I need you to know what you're coming into." "I understand. There's one more thing." Frick paused in a way that was not about gathering information, but about deciding how to deliver it. "Stuart Vance, the billing administrator. He didn't come in for his shift this morning. His car is in the lot, but he's not at his desk and he's not answering his phone." Nora said nothing. "We're looking for him," Frick said. "Get to the hospital. Use the east entrance off Meridian. I'll have someone meet you there. And Walsh, stay off the main floors until I clear you." The call ended. Nora looked at Ray. He had heard enough of it from her side to have the shape of it. "I have to go," she said. "I know." He picked up his keys from the counter. "I'm driving you." She started to say no, looked at him, decided that argument was a use of time she didn't have.
Fine, let's go.
The east entrance off Meridian was a service-facing door normally used for deliveries and housekeeping logistics. At 7:44 a.m., it was open, propped by a man in plain clothes who had the same posture as Doyle. Not military exactly, but trained in something that left a mark on how a person stood. He checked her face against something on his phone and nodded once and stepped aside. Inside, the service corridor was fluorescent and plain, nothing like the main hospital. Linens, supply carts, the industrial smell of a building's working infrastructure. He led her through 2 turns to a freight elevator and up to the 2nd floor, where a converted conference room had become something else entirely in the past 90 minutes. 3 folding tables had been pushed together and were covered in laptops, tablets, printed maps of the hospital floor plans, and coffee cups in various states of abandonment. 4 people were working at the tables, none of whom looked up when she came in. Agent Doyle was on his phone in the corner. Against the far wall, talking to a woman Nora didn't recognize, stood a man in his late 50s wearing civilian clothes that didn't fully disguise the fact that he was the kind of person who had worn a uniform for most of his adult life. He turned when she entered and looked at her with an evaluating directness that was not unkind. "You're Walsh," he said. It wasn't a question. He extended a hand. "Colonel James Whitaker. I knew your work before I knew your name. Marcus spoke of you twice in debriefings, and both times it was specific and complimentary, which for Marcus means something." She shook his hand. "Where is he?" "Secured. We're not discussing the location in this room." He said it matter-of-factly. "He wanted to be here. We told him no. He argued. We told him no again. He said some things that I won't repeat, and then he complied." The edge of his mouth moved. "He's doing better than his chart suggests, for what it's worth." "How did the military get involved in a federal fraud case?" Whitaker turned back to the table and picked up a printed document. "The procurement network Hale identified has military contracts running through it, not just civilian hospital supply chains, active-duty medical supply contracts. 3 forward operating bases in the past 2 years received substandard surgical equipment under fraudulent quality certifications. We've had 2 operational medical failures we couldn't explain until Hale's intelligence started filling in the architecture." He handed her the document. "This isn't just hospital fraud, Ms. Walsh. This is a network that has been selling garbage to military medical units and billing the Department of Defense for quality goods. That makes it our problem." She scanned the document. Numbers, contractor names, dates. The structure of something that had been running a long time and running carefully. And at the bottom of the 3rd page, under a header marked Facility Connections, Civilian, Crestline Regional Medical Center. Below it, 2 names, Stuart Vance, Procurement Administrator, and Roland Mercer, MD, Chief of Trauma Surgery. She handed the document back. "Mercer's been in it from the beginning," she said. "He's the civilian anchor. Vance handled the billing and the paperwork. Mercer provided the medical legitimacy, signed off on equipment assessments, provided the clinical credentials that made the certifications credible." Whitaker's voice was flat. "A surgeon's signature on a quality certification carries weight. That's what they were buying. And he knew the equipment was substandard. He signed certification saying it wasn't. The gap between what he signed and what he knew is what the U.S. attorney will be arguing." Whitaker looked at her. "What happened in that trauma bay yesterday morning? Mercer trying to prevent your intervention? The speed of the formal complaint? That makes a different kind of sense now. You were a witness, a clinically credentialed witness who had just demonstrated in front of a room full of staff that his judgment was dangerously wrong. That's a liability he couldn't afford." Doyle ended his phone call and crossed the room. "We have movement on the 4th floor. Security camera shows one of our 2 individuals in the south corridor, moving toward the ICU." Whitaker turned. "How long to room 14? "At that pace, 3 minutes, maybe 4. "Where's our team?" "Staged on the 3rd floor stairwell and the north corridor 4th floor, waiting on your call." The room had a particular quality of compressed readiness. Everyone functioning, nobody wasted. Nora had been in rooms like this before, and the feeling was specific, the moment before the shape of a situation becomes fixed. "What about Vance?" she asked. Doyle looked at her. "Still no location? We have eyes on the parking lot. His car hasn't moved. He's in the building somewhere. Then you have a second problem, she said. If Vance is still in the building and he's not at his desk, and these two individuals came in through the physician entrance with valid credentials, Doyle was already moving before she finished the sentence. He let them in, he said. Or they came for him too, she said, and he knows it. The next 18 minutes were the kind that compressed time in a specific way. Not slow, not fast, but hyper-detailed, every second registering its own distinct content. Nora stayed in the conference room because those were her instructions, and because the people in the corridors were trained for exactly this, and she was not the variable that needed to be in that equation right now. She watched the laptop screens. The hospital's security camera feeds were being pulled live, not the official display system, which the intruders might have access to, but a secondary feed that the FBI's technical team had tapped from the building's infrastructure. 4 screens, 4 angles of the 4th floor. She watched the individual on the south corridor approach the ICU entrance. He was wearing scrubs. He moved with the controlled efficiency of someone who had a purpose and a timeline, and the scrubs were the right color and the right fit, and if you weren't looking for something specific, you would not look twice. She was looking for something specific, his hands, the way he scanned the corridor at the ICU door, the half-second pause before he pushed through, not the pause of someone who worked there, but the pause of someone who was checking. The second individual was not on the 4th floor cameras. That was the problem. "Where's the second one?" she said. The tech at the laptop nearest her, a young woman named Petra, who had been introduced by first name only, was already cycling through other feeds. Ground floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, service corridors. "I don't have them," Petra said. "How long has the feed been clean?" Last confirmed on camera was 6:12 a.m., north stairwell, 2nd floor. 90 minutes. An individual who moved tactically had been off camera for 90 minutes in a building they had accessed using valid credentials. On the 4th floor feed, the first individual pushed through the ICU door. The team in the north corridor was moving. Nora could hear radio traffic in the room. Clipped, numerical, the shorthand of people who had done this before. She looked at the floor plan on the table. Her eyes moved. Service corridors, stairwells, the ICU layout. Room 14 was at the south end, accessible from the main ICU corridor, or, she looked at the map more carefully, from a service access passage that ran parallel to the patient rooms for supply delivery purposes. It connected to the south stairwell. She looked at Petra. "Is there a camera on the ICU service passage?" Petra's hands were already moving. Pulling it. The feed came up. Grainy, fixed angle, the narrow corridor of a service passage she had never had occasion to use in 14 months of working the 3rd floor. The passage was not empty. A figure in scrubs was moving through it, away from the camera, toward the south end of the ICU where the patient rooms were. Moving fast. Moving like someone who had a floor plan. "That's the second one," Nora said. She was already at the door of the conference room. "They're coming in from both sides. Your team on the north corridor is chasing the first one. The second one is in the service passage hitting from the south. Room 14 is accessible from that passage." Doyle looked up from his radio. "Our south team is not in the passage. They're in the main corridor." She had the floor plan in her head. The service passage connects to the room through a supply access panel. Older construction. The panel is lockable from the room side, but it's not a security door. 2 seconds of Doyle making a decision. "South team, redirect to ICU service passage, south access now." Into his radio. Immediate acknowledgement. But the passage was long and the second individual was close. Nora was out of the conference room before anyone said anything else. She took the stairs. Not the main stairwell, the service stairwell, which she knew because 14 months of working in a building meant knowing its bones, even if you'd never had reason to use every part of them. 3rd floor, then a connecting passage, then the south service stairwell up to 4. She heard radio traffic behind her and didn't stop. The 4th floor service passage was accessed through a door marked staff only that opened with a hospital keycard. She didn't have a hospital keycard. She had been stripped of it yesterday morning. She looked at the door for half a second. Then she hit it with her shoulder at the latch point, hard, not the movie's version of hitting a door, which accomplished nothing, but the specific mechanical force at the specific structural weakness, which she knew about because she had been taught about it in contexts that were not civilian. The latch gave. The door opened. The service passage was narrow and lit with utility lighting, supply carts parked at intervals. She moved through it fast and low, and 30 feet ahead she could see the second individual at the supply access panel to room 14 working at the latch mechanism with something small and metallic. "Stop," she said. The individual turned. He was bigger than he'd looked on camera, broad across the shoulders, the scrubs not really fitting the way scrubs fit people who actually wore them to work. He looked at her with the specific assessment of someone calculating a variable they hadn't planned for. He reached into the front pocket of the scrubs. She closed the distance before the hand came out. What happened in the next 12 seconds was not graceful or cinematic or clean. It was fast and functional, and left her with a bruised forearm and a torn sleeve, and him face down on the service passage floor with his arm at an angle that was going to require medical attention, which was almost funny given where they were. The object from his pocket, a compact folding tool that could open a lock or cause other problems, was 3 feet down the passage, kicked there in the first 2 seconds. She was breathing hard. Her hands were not shaking, which she noticed with the detached quality of someone who had been here before and knew that the shaking, when it came, would come later. She heard boots on the service stairs behind her, the South team arriving 45 seconds after she had, and the sound of the main ICU team taking down the first individual in the corridor outside, the sounds distinct and purposeful and then quickly controlled. Doyle came through the service passage door 30 seconds after his team, took in the scene, and looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. "I told you to stay in the conference room," he said. "The door to the service passage was locked," she said. "I couldn't follow that instruction." A pause. "Your arm." She looked. The sleeve was torn, and the forearm underneath had an impact bruise developing. Not broken, she'd checked automatically. Full range, just soft tissue. "It's fine." He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned to his team. "Get him up. I want both of them in federal custody, and I want medical on the one in the passage in the next 10 minutes. He turned back to Nora. "Come with me." The next 2 hours had a different texture. The controlled aftermath of a situation resolved, the machinery of consequence beginning to engage. Federal agents moved through Crestline Regional Medical Center in the particular organized way of people executing a plan that had been ready and was now finally running. The hospital administration, a chief executive named Barton Ellard, who had the look of a man watching a building fall in slow motion, was brought to the second-floor conference room and informed of the scope of the federal investigation, the warrants being executed simultaneously at the hospital's administrative offices, and the arrests of the 2 individuals who had entered the building. Stuart Vance was found in a supply closet on the basement level at 8:20 a.m. He had his laptop in a bag that suggested he'd been planning to wait until he had a window to leave. He did not resist. He sat down when asked to sit and asked for a lawyer in a voice that had no volume left in it. Roland Mercer arrived for his morning rounds at 8:47 a.m., which was later than usual. He came through the main physician entrance with his coffee and his pager and the default authority of someone who had operated in this building for 11 years, as though the building existed for his benefit. He was met at the elevator by 2 federal agents who identified themselves and informed him that he was being detained for questioning in connection with a federal fraud investigation, at which point his coffee cup hit the lobby floor and the calm he had worn for 11 years came off entirely. Nora wasn't there for that part. She heard about it afterward from Doyle, who described it with the economy of someone who had seen a lot of people learn that consequence had arrived and had stopped finding it interesting. What she was doing at 8:47 a.m. was sitting in the second-floor conference room with Colonel Whitaker and a woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office named Priya Okafor, who was precise and methodical and had a yellow legal pad covered in notes. They were going through the timeline of the trauma bay, Nora's observations, the clinical decision points, the monitor data that Jess had preserved. Okafor asked questions in a specific sequence that Nora recognized as the architecture of a legal record being built, and she answered each one with the same clinical precision she had used in her documentation. Midway through, Whitaker's phone buzzed. He looked at it and then looked at Nora. "Marcus wants to know if you're okay," he said. "Specifically, he says And I'm quoting, "Tell Walsh I heard she took someone down in the passage, and I need to know she didn't do something stupid with her shoulder again." Nora looked at him. "He knows about my shoulder?" "Apparently." She thought about it briefly. Kandahar, 2019, a fall she'd rather not revisit. "Tell him my shoulder is fine and he should focus on his chest tube." Whitaker typed the response. Okafor waited with the patience of someone who had learned that the human moments in the middle of legal proceedings were not interruptions but were, in fact, evidence of something worth recording. The statement took another 40 minutes. When it was finished, Okafor capped her pen and looked at her notepad and then at Nora. "The complaint Mercer filed," she said. "The formal termination request. Given what we have documented about his involvement in the procurement network, the speed of that filing, and the pattern of conduct in the trauma bay, we will be informing the State Nursing Board that the Department of Justice considers this complaint retaliatory and without clinical merit." She paused. "That's not an official determination of the board's proceedings, which are independent, but the board will know our position." "I understand," Nora said. "The intervention you performed was clinically necessary, properly executed, and directly responsible for the survival of a federal witness at a moment critical to an 18-month investigation." Okafor looked at her steadily. "The record will reflect that." Nora nodded once. Outside the conference room's narrow window, she could see a slice of the hospital's main lobby, the ordinary movement of a building continuing to function. Nurses at desks, a cart being wheeled, a family in the waiting area who did not know and did not need to know what had happened in the past 22 hours. She looked at all of that for a moment, the surface of things continuing regardless. Then Doyle knocked and came in. "We've got a development." Okafor looked up. Whitaker was already on his feet. "The two individuals from the building," Doyle said. "The one from the passage is talking. He lawyered up first, which is expected, but while we were processing him in the holding room, he said something, unprompted, to the agent in the room that he clearly thought would get him a different kind of deal." He paused. "He said Mercer didn't just sign certifications. He said Mercer knew about the crash, knew Hale was a federal witness, and that 3 weeks ago, Mercer provided information that helped identify Hale's location and movement patterns." The room was very quiet. "He's saying Mercer identified Hale as the witness," Whitaker said. "He's saying more than that." Doyle looked at each of them in sequence. "He's saying Mercer was the one who flagged that Hale had been admitted to Crestline Regional after the crash, and that after Hale survived, after Walsh's intervention kept him alive, Mercer's contact in the network was informed that the witness had survived and was still in the hospital." Nora understood it then. The entire shape of it connected. Mercer filing the formal complaint within hours of the crash. That wasn't just ego protection or liability management. That was removing a witness. If she was suspended, discredited, formally under review, her testimony about what she had observed in that trauma bay, the clinical decision, Mercer's conduct, the sequence of events, became the testimony of a terminated employee under investigation rather than a credentialed nurse. And the speed of the complaint, the level of detail. "Already written," Ray had said. Already written because Mercer had already known what he was going to do before the morning was over. "He knew Hale was the witness before the crash," she said. "Not after." Doyle looked at her. "That's what we're working to establish. If he knew before the crash, if he provided location information that enabled the crash, then what happened in the trauma bay wasn't just negligence or ego." She felt the full weight of it settle. "He was in the room when Hale came in. He knew exactly who was on that gurney, and he was actively preventing—" "Walsh." Doyle's voice was careful. "We're working to establish it. The individual in custody is one source. Mercer's lawyer is going to contest everything he says." "What does your forensics team have?" Okafor answered. "We are pulling Mercer's communications for the past 30 days. Cell records, email, hospital system access logs. If he made contact with the network during or after the crash, it will be there." She paused. "It will take time to process, but the warrant is broad and the U.S. Attorney has authorized a full-scope pull." Time. The thing that moved differently in situations like this. Too slow for justice and too fast for everything else. Nora stood up.
Her arm was aching in the dull way of bruised tissue, the kind of pain that didn't demand attention but was persistently present.
What happens to the hospital's complaint against me while all of this is in process? Whitaker spoke before Okafor could. That complaint is going to have a very difficult time surviving what we are about to put into the public record. He said it with the directness of someone who had made a decision and was stating it. My office will be making a formal statement about your conduct during the events of the past 24 hours. The Army considers what you did in that trauma bay and in that service passage to be consistent with the training and character of someone who served this country with distinction. He paused. The statement will be specific. She looked at him. She did not know, in that moment, what she felt about that, whether it was relief or exposure or some combination of things she didn't have a clean word for. She had spent a deliberate amount of time being invisible, and being visible again was not a simple thing. All right, she said. Doyle's radio crackled. He stepped to the side to answer it and then turned back. Mercer's attorney is here. He's asking for the formal charges. Doyle looked at Okafor. And Mercer is talking. Before his attorney got there, he talked. Our agent in the room has it on record. Okafor stood up very fast. What did he say? Enough, Doyle said. More than enough. He paused. He said Vance panicked, that Vance was the one who brought in the two individuals from the passage. He's trying to put everything below him. He looked at Okafor. But in the process of doing that, he confirmed that he knew who Hale was when the ambulance brought him in. The room held that for a moment, a surgeon who had known who was on his table, who had looked at a dying federal witness and chosen, deliberately and with full knowledge, to let the injury that would kill him go unaddressed, who had then, when a nurse caught what he was hoping wouldn't be caught, shoved her into a supply cart and fired her to remove the witness to his conduct. The full architecture of it, complete. Nora looked at the window again, the lobby, the ordinary surface of the building continuing. And then Petra appeared in the doorway with a laptop and the particular expression of someone who has found something they weren't expecting to find. We pulled Mercer's hospital system access logs, Petra said, time-stamped. She turned the laptop toward the room. He accessed Marcus Hale's patient record at 7:29 a.m. yesterday, 2 minutes before the ambulance arrived. Everyone in the room went still. The ambulance called ahead at 7:25, Doyle said slowly. Name of the patient was included in the radio call. Mercer accessed the record 4 minutes after the call came in. Which means he knew, Okafor said. Which means he ran the name, Doyle said, cross-referenced it, found what he needed to find. Nora looked at the timestamp on Petra's screen, 7:29 a.m. Mercer in his office or at a terminal or somewhere in this building, pulling up the record of a patient who hadn't arrived yet and finding the name that connected to everything he'd been protecting for 18 months. And then going to the trauma bay and doing what he'd done. She looked at the timestamp until the number was fixed in her mind clearly enough that she would carry it exactly. There's something else, Petra said. She scrolled down the access log. He also accessed one more record. She paused. At 7:31 a.m., 2 minutes after Hale's. She turned the laptop a fraction more. The record Mercer had accessed at 7:31 a.m., before the ambulance had even arrived, before the trauma bay doors had opened, was not Hale's. It was Nora Walsh's. Her own record, pulled at 7:31 a.m., before Marcus Hale had come through the trauma bay doors, before any of it had started. She stared at the timestamp on Petra's screen and felt the pieces lock into a configuration that was complete in the way that terrible things sometimes were. Fully formed, no gaps, nothing left to interpretation. Mercer had run Hale's name and found the federal witness. Then he had run hers, found the former combat medic who happened to be assigned to his trauma bay that morning, and had walked into that room already knowing exactly who he was dealing with on both sides of the gurney. He hadn't been caught off guard in the trauma bay. He had been managing a situation he had already assessed. He knew, she said. Not to anyone specifically, just placing the fact in the room where it belonged. He knew, Doyle confirmed. His voice had the quality of someone who had seen a lot of cases and recognized the moment when the architecture became undeniable. Accessed both records before the patient arrived. That's premeditation on the obstruction charge, minimum. Our attorney is going to have considerably more to work with than we had an hour ago. Okafor was already on her phone, moving toward the door, her voice low and rapid. Petra was copying the access log to an evidence file. Whitaker stood at the table with his arms crossed, and the particular stillness of a man who was angry in a way he had decided not to perform. Nora looked at her own name on that screen for one more second. Then she stopped looking. There was nothing useful in sitting with it. She knew what it meant. Mercer had pulled her file and made a calculation that she was a threat, that she needed to be neutralized, and that the formal complaint was the mechanism. A discredited nurse with a termination for cause couldn't testify credibly, couldn't be taken seriously, couldn't push back against an 11-year attending surgeon with institutional support and a hospital administration that had been looking the other way for years. He had underestimated the variable he was trying to control. People who built systems to protect themselves usually did. They planned for the official version of the threat and forgot about the human one. She picked up her jacket from the chair. "I need some air." Doyle looked at her. "Stay in the building. I'll be in the lobby." He nodded once, which was enough. The main lobby of Crestline Regional at 9:15 a.m. was doing what hospital lobbies did, moving people through, absorbing families and patients, and the ordinary accumulated weight of a building that existed to deal with the worst days of strangers' lives. Nobody in the lobby knew that there were federal agents on the second floor, that the chief of trauma surgery had been detained, that 2 individuals were in federal custody from a service passage on the 4th floor. The surface held. It almost always did, longer than you'd think. She sat in a chair near the window and let the lobby be what it was for a few minutes. A woman came through the main doors with a child on her hip and the specific exhausted alertness of a parent who hadn't slept. An elderly man in a cardigan moved slowly with a walker toward the elevator. A volunteer at the information desk answered the same question she probably answered 30 times a shift. Nora watched all of it and felt, for the first time in 36 hours, something that was adjacent to stillness. Her phone buzzed. "Ray, Jess just called me. The federal agents are on the floor. Everyone knows something's happening. She's okay, but she's asking about you." She typed back, "Tell her I'm okay. Tell her the documentation she saved matters. She'll know what that means." A pause. Then, "She says good. She also says she wants to buy you a drink when this is over. Tell her I'll hold her to it." She put the phone in her pocket and sat for another minute. The bruise on her arm had moved from dull to specific, a clean ache that would be colorful by tomorrow, but wasn't anything she needed to manage. She rotated the arm once, felt the full range, confirmed again that it was soft tissue only. Then her phone rang. Not a number she knew, but the area code that she had, in the past 48 hours, come to associate with a particular category of call. She picked up. "Ms. Walsh, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Linda Pryor, out of the Las Vegas Federal District. I'll be brief. We are formally opening an obstruction of justice charge against Dr. Roland Mercer, in addition to the fraud counts, predicated on the access log your team recovered this morning and the statement he made before counsel arrived. I want you to know that your nursing board complaint, we've been in contact with the board chair as of 30 minutes ago. Our office has submitted a formal letter outlining the evidentiary context surrounding that complaint's filing. We cannot direct the board's decision, but the board chair indicated she was, her word, troubled by the timeline." "Thank you," Nora said. "Don't thank me. You kept a federal witness alive and then helped us secure the building this morning, which I'm going to pretend I don't know the details of because it will simplify my paperwork." A pause that was almost dry. "Agent Frick speaks highly of you. Colonel Whitaker's office has also been in contact. We're going to need a formal statement from you in the next 48 hours. I'll be available." "Good." Pryor's voice shifted slightly. Still professional, but with a directness that wasn't procedural. "For what it's worth, Ms. Walsh, what Dr. Mercer did in that trauma bay, with full knowledge of who was on that table, is among the more calculated things I have seen in 18 months of working this case. The fact that it didn't work is because of you. That's on the record now, all of it." The call ended. She sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the lobby and thought about the specific phrase, "The fact that it didn't work is because of you," and held it at a careful distance, the way she held most things about her own role in events. She had not gone into that trauma bay to be a variable in a federal case. She had gone in to do her job. The two things had overlapped, and the overlap had consequences she was still absorbing. That was the way it usually worked. You did the thing because it needed doing, and you found out later what it meant. At 10:40 a.m., with the second-floor conference room still running and federal agents still moving through the hospital's administrative floors, Roland Mercer was formally placed under arrest. She wasn't present for it. She heard from Doyle afterward, described with the same economy he applied to everything. Mercer had been in a holding room on the second floor. Not a cell, just a room with a table. And when the arrest was formalized and the specific charges were read, including the obstruction count, he had asked to speak with the U.S. Attorney's Office directly. The answer was no. His attorney arrived. The process proceeded. What did happen publicly, and what Nora learned because Jess called Ray, who called her, was that when federal agents executed the warrant on Mercer's office and the hospital's procurement records, they did it on the third floor in view of the nursing station during morning shift. The agents did not make a performance of it. They simply moved through the floor with their credentials and their paperwork and did their work, and the nursing staff watched and the word moved through the building the way words move through hospital buildings, fast, specific, accurate in its broad strokes, if not always in every detail. Jess, who had 11 years of documentation and a very good memory and the particular patience of someone who had been waiting for something to matter, gave a preliminary statement to a federal agent at 11 a.m. that lasted 40 minutes. Stuart Vance, in federal custody since 8/20, waived his right to remain silent at 9:50 and began talking with the specific momentum of a man who had decided that the structure he'd been inside was no longer standing and that the only useful thing left was to tell someone where all the pieces had fallen. His attorney tried twice to slow him down. Vance kept talking. By noon, the U.S. Attorney's Office had enough from Vance's statement to expand the warrant scope to 3 additional contractor entities in Phoenix and 1 in Reno, and to begin the process of notifying the Department of Defense about the military supply contract fraud. The 2 individuals taken from the hospital building were identified through federal databases as contracted operatives with connections to a private security firm in Scottsdale that had, it turned out, been doing work for entities connected to the procurement network for the past 2 years. Neither was talking. Both were in federal custody. The one from the service passage had a wrist fracture that required setting, which was handled at Crestline Regional by an orthopedic resident who did not know and did not need to know how the fracture had occurred. Nora Walsh spent the middle part of that day in the second-floor conference room working through her formal statement with Okafor, who was methodical and thorough, and who asked her at one point to describe in specific clinical detail the sequence of events in the trauma bay from the moment Marcus Hale arrived to the moment she was escorted out by security. She described it exactly. Every step, every observation, every decision point, every response on the monitor. She described it the way she had described things in field debriefs. Precisely, without editorializing, without softening the parts that were uncomfortable. Okafor wrote it all down and then looked up from her legal pad. "When Mercer shoved you," she said, "into the supply cart, you didn't respond physically." "No." "Why not?" Nora thought about the honest answer. Because responding physically would have made me the problem in the room, and I needed to be the solution. Okafor looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote that down, too. At 2:15 p.m., Colonel Whitaker found her in the lobby again. She kept returning to it, the lobby, the ordinary surface of things, and sat in the chair beside her without ceremony. "He's asking to see you," Whitaker said. She knew who he meant. "He's been relocated." "He has, and he's asking anyway." He looked at her sideways. "You're not obligated." "I know." He also said, and again, I'm quoting directly, "Tell her it's not an order and it's not a request. Tell her it's Marcus asking Nora, not a master sergeant asking a specialist. She'll know the difference." She was quiet for a moment. She knew the difference. "When?" she said. "Whenever you're ready. I have a car." Sheb. The location was a federal residential facility on the east side of the city. Not a hospital in the formal sense, but a secured medical suite inside a building that had no identifying markers and that existed for exactly this kind of situation. She signed in at a desk staffed by people who were polite and efficient and who checked 3 forms of identification before they let her through. The room was better than a hospital room. It had a window that showed a courtyard and actual curtains, and a chair that was not the standard institution issue. Marcus Hale was sitting up in the bed at a 45-degree angle, which was the most you could manage with a chest tube, and he looked better than he had 2 nights ago in the ICU. The color was back. The focus in his eyes was complete rather than effortful. He watched her cross the room and sit in the chair, and for a moment neither of them said anything. It was the kind of quiet that existed between people who had been in the same difficult places and didn't need to perform for each other. "Your arm," he said. "Service passage." "Doyle told me." He looked at it. "You should have waited for the team." The team was 30 seconds behind the individual who was about to breach your room. Your empty room, but he didn't know that. Still. "Marcus." He stopped. "I made the call I had to make," she said. "Same as always." He held her gaze for a moment and then let it go in the way of someone who recognized that argument had a ceiling and they had reached it. "How are you doing?" he asked. Not clinical, actually asking. She thought about it honestly. "I'm working on it. The board complaint is going to resolve the way it's going to resolve. The DOJ submitted a letter. The access log is in evidence. What Mercer did in that room is on the record." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry about it, because I am. But the anger isn't the part that's hard." "What's the hard part?" She looked at the window. The courtyard was empty. Just concrete and a bench and a line of low shrubs in the late afternoon light. "I built something quiet, intentional. I came here to be a nurse, not—" She stopped. "Not what I used to be. And now the thing I was trying to be separate from is the thing that kept him alive. And the thing I built here is being dismantled because someone needed me to be powerless, and a man with institutional authority decided that was achievable." She paused again. "That's the part that's hard. Not what happened, the fact that it was designed to happen." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Nora, what you were trying to be separate from, the training, the instinct, the whole architecture of what you spent 6 years building, it didn't go anywhere. You carried it into every shift. It's in how you watch a room and how you read a patient and how you make decisions under pressure." He paused. "You didn't leave that behind. You just stopped giving it a name." She looked at him. "The quiet life you built here, it wasn't separate from what you are. It was just a smaller room for it to live in." He held her gaze steadily. "Maybe the room needs to be bigger." She sat with that for a while. Outside, a bird moved across the courtyard, hit the edge of the frame, and was gone. "How long until testimony?" she said. 12 days, assuming my chest cooperates." He shifted carefully. "Vance's statement apparently accelerated some things. The U.S. Attorney's Office thinks they have enough now that even if something happened to me, the case holds, which is a strange thing to hear about yourself. But there it is. Nothing's going to happen to you." "No, I don't think it is." He looked at her. "Not anymore." She stayed for another hour. They talked about less consequential things. The orthopedic timeline on his leg, the specific inconvenience of chest tubes, the fact that Whitaker had apparently argued with the medical team for 20 minutes about the recovery window and lost. She told him about Fulton the cat, Ray's bicycle parts, the dry cleaner parking lot view from her apartment. He told her about the 8 months before the testimony, the places he'd been, the way that kind of sustained caution wore on a person, even when you were trained for it. When she stood to go, he said, "They're going to offer you something. The hospital, the board. Eventually, when everything shakes out, someone is going to offer you something and frame it as restoration. Make sure what they're offering is actually what you want, not what they need to offer to close the chapter." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have standing right now that you didn't have 48 hours ago. Use it for what you actually want, not for what makes the institution comfortable." She thought about that. "I'll keep it in mind. Keep more than that in mind." He looked at her with the directness that she had always associated with him. No performance, no softening, just the thing itself. You're one of the best medics I've ever worked with. In any context, that's not sentiment, that's an assessment. She didn't know what to do with that except receive it honestly. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me. Go do something with it. She left the room and walked back down the corridor and signed out at the desk and got into Whitaker's car. And she rode back to the city in the late afternoon light without talking, which Whitaker, to his credit, seemed to understand was what was needed. The nursing board convened an emergency review panel 9 days later. The panel had Nora's statement, Okafor's letter, the time-stamped monitor data that Jess had preserved, the formal FBI assessment of the clinical intervention, statements from Paul Adler and Marco Reyes, and the access log showing Mercer had pulled both records before the ambulance arrived. They also had a statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office formally characterizing the complaint as retaliatory and without clinical merit, and a letter from Colonel Whitaker's office at Army Medical Command describing Nora Walsh's training, record of service, and professional judgment in terms that left the panel very little interpretive room. The panel deliberated for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Then the board chair, a woman named Dr. Helen Marsh, who had been running emergency medicine reviews for 22 years and who had read the file twice before the meeting, delivered the finding. The complaint was dismissed in its entirety. The record was cleared. Nora Walsh's nursing license was unaffected. Dr. Marsh looked at her across the table when it was done and said simply, "The record shows what happened. I'm sorry it took a federal investigation to put it where everyone could see it." "It doesn't matter how it got there," Nora said. "It's there." Dr. Marsh nodded. "It is," Wolf said. Roland Mercer was formally indicted on 11 counts, 7 related to the procurement fraud, 2 for obstruction of justice, 1 for filing a false official report in connection with the nursing board complaint, and 1 for accessory to conspiracy in connection with the crash on Interstate 15, which the federal investigation had by then established was not an accident and which had involved information Mercer had provided to the network about Hale's movement. His attorney issued a statement that described the charges as politically motivated and aggressively contested. The attorney was doing his job. The evidence did not particularly care. The hospital's chief executive, Barton Ellard, resigned 14 days after the federal warrants were executed, citing personal reasons. His letter to the board was 3 sentences long. The board of directors of Crestline Regional Medical Center issued a public statement acknowledging the investigation, committing to a full internal review of procurement practices, and, in a paragraph that had clearly been written by someone with a legal background and an eye on liability, expressing regret for the institutional failures that had allowed the conduct to continue. The statement also, in its 4th paragraph, acknowledged that a member of the nursing staff had been wrongfully subjected to a retaliatory formal complaint, and that the hospital expressed its sincere apology for the circumstances surrounding her termination. It did not name Mercer. It did not use the word termination for him, only for her, which was an asymmetry that Nora noticed and filed without comment. Jess sent her a screenshot of the statement with a single text below it. LOL sincerely, Nora sent back a single emoji, which was the most expressive she had been via text in 14 months. Ray heard about the board decision from Jess before Nora called him, which meant when she did call, he already knew, and the call was short and not particularly articulate on either side and was better for it. "Drinks," he said. "Drinks," she agreed. Chab. 3 weeks after the trauma bay, 22 days, to be specific, because she had counted without meaning to, Nora was offered her position back at Crestline Regional. The offer came in a letter from the interim chief medical officer, a woman named Dr. Sasha Park, who had been brought in from outside, and who seemed to be approaching the institution situation with the practical energy of someone doing remediation work rather than reputation management. The letter was careful and specific and acknowledged what had happened directly rather than around. It offered reinstatement at her previous position with back pay for the period of her suspension. She read it twice. Then she thought about what Marcus had said. Make sure what they're offering is actually what you want. And she sat with that for a couple of days before she called Dr. Park directly. "I appreciate the offer," she said. "I have a counteroffer." There was a pause on the line that was curious rather than defensive. "Tell me." "Reinstatement, back pay, and a formal role in developing the trauma nursing protocol review process. specifically the chain of clinical escalation when nursing staff and attending physicians disagree on patient presentation. A structured process, documented, with teeth, not a suggestion box. An actual mechanism. Another pause. That's not a small ask. No. It's also the thing that would have mattered before any of this happened. The absence of that mechanism is how a surgeon could run a trauma bay for 11 years on his own judgment with no check on it from nursing staff. She paused. I've worked in environments with proper escalation structures. They work. They don't threaten physician authority. They protect patients from the consequences of individual error. That's all this is. Dr. Park was quiet for a moment. I'm going to need to bring this to the board. I know. It'll take 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll wait. It took 17 days. The board approved it. Not without conditions, not without modifications to the scope, and not without a conversation that Nora was not present for, but that Dr. Park described afterward as extended and at points heated. But it was approved. The protocol review process would be developed collaboratively, with nursing staff input, and would be implemented across the trauma and critical care units within 90 days. She accepted reinstatement on a Tuesday morning. She went back to the 3rd floor. Jess was at the charge desk. She looked up when Nora came through, assessed the situation in the way she assessed all situations, fully, quickly, without commentary, and then said, "Bed 2 needs a new IV. Vein rolled on the first attempt." "On it," Nora said. She put on her gloves and went to work. Marcus Hale testified before the federal grand jury on a Thursday, 26 days after the crash on Interstate 15. His leg was in a walking boot, and his chest was still doing the work of healing, and he sat in the witness chair for 4 hours and gave his testimony in the same direct, complete way he had done everything she had ever seen him do. She wasn't there. She was on shift at Crestline Regional, Bay 3, working a Friday that had the particular rhythm of a department finding its footing after something disruptive. Not chaotic, not broken, but recalibrating. Dr. Park had brought in 2 new attendings from outside. The nursing staff was adjusting to a floor where the weight that had been pressing down for years was simply gone. People were louder, not unprofessional, just louder, the specific volume of people who had stopped managing the acoustics of their workplace around a single person's volatility. Jess told her during a lunch break that was actually taken rather than skipped that it felt different. Different how? Nora asked. Jess thought about it. Like when you've had a headache for so long you forgot it was a headache, and then it's gone and you realize you've been tensing your jaw for months. She paused. Like that. Nora nodded. Are you okay? Jess asked. Direct, without hedging. Jess didn't hedge. Getting there, Nora said. That's an honest answer. I try. Jess looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has worked alongside a person long enough to see them clearly. You know what I noticed? When all of this was happening, and it was a lot, all at once, you never made it about yourself. You kept making it about the patient, about the process, about the mechanism that needed to exist so it didn't happen again. Even when it was very much about you, you kept redirecting it. Nora looked at her lunch, which was a sandwich she was working through with the efficient attention of someone who had eaten under worse conditions. That's not self-sacrifice, Jess said. I'm not calling it noble. I'm saying I think that's actually just who you are. And I think for a long time you were in a place where who you are was a liability. And now maybe it isn't anymore. Nora put the sandwich down. She thought about Marcus in the federal witness suite saying maybe the room needs to be bigger. She thought about 6 years of decisions made in the dark with incomplete information and insufficient resources, and the knowledge that being wrong had a consequence she could not afford. She thought about 14 months of being quiet and careful and invisible, of absorbing the contempt of a man who had decided she was the floor beneath his feet, of doing her job with precision and receiving nothing for it except the knowledge that the patients in her care had been well looked after. She thought about Bay 4, the monitor alarming, the needle in her hand, the sound of air rushing through a decompressed chest cavity that meant one specific thing, still alive. Still alive. I spent a long time, she said slowly, believing that the best thing I could do was take up less space, be less visible, let the work speak and keep myself quiet. She looked at Jess.
And the work did speak. But nobody was listening to it. And eventually the only thing that made anyone listen was being loud in exactly the moment when being loud was the only option left. Jess nodded once. I don't think I want to wait for that kind of moment again, Nora said. I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think it's right. She picked the sandwich back up. The protocol review. That's the version of this that doesn't require a crisis. That's the version where the mechanism exists before someone almost dies because there was no mechanism. Which is the better version, Jess said, by a significant margin. They finished lunch in the comfortable quiet of people who had worked alongside each other long enough to share silence without filling it. Marcus called her on a Saturday evening, 6 weeks after everything. She was in her apartment, still the same one, still facing the dry cleaner parking lot, though she had been looking at listings with a vague, non-urgent intention that felt like the beginning of something rather than the end of anything. How's the leg? She asked. Walking without the boot as of yesterday. It's a process. A pause. How's the floor? Different? Better? She looked at the window, still figuring out what that means exactly. That's fine. That's how it works. They talked for a while. He told her the indictment had been expanded to include 2 additional contractors who had been identified through Vance's cooperation. She told him about the protocol review process. The first draft had been circulated to nursing staff for comment, and the response had been, in Jess's words, enthusiastically detailed. She told him Dr. Park had asked her to present the framework to the board of directors in 3 weeks. You're going to present to the board, he said. Apparently, Nora Walsh, who spent 14 months being invisible. Don't make it a thing. It's a thing. She could hear something in his voice that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to warmth. Do you know what I told the U.S. attorney when they asked me to describe what happened in the trauma bay? No? I told them that the most competent medical professional I've encountered in 20 years of working in and around field medicine and trauma care made a clinical call under pressure that saved my life while being actively obstructed by the person with the most institutional authority in the room, and that the institution's response was to remove her. A pause. And that the fact that she was removed and came back and is now building a mechanism to prevent it from happening to someone else is, her word, not mine, I think, sustainable. She was quiet for a moment. You've been talking to Jess, she said. He laughed, an actual laugh, full and brief and real. Whitaker might have passed something along. You have a network. I've had a network since I was 22 years old. It doesn't stop working just because you retire. He paused. You should think about using yours. I'm getting there. I know you are. Another pause, the comfortable kind. You saved me again. 3rd time. It counts. She looked at the dry cleaner parking lot. A woman was loading bags into her car in the Saturday evening light. An ordinary thing happening in ordinary time. The surface of things continuing, which it always did, which was not nothing. Take care of yourself, Marcus. You too, specialist. She smiled at the window, which nobody saw, which was fine. Some things didn't need an audience. She set the phone down and sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt, fully and without qualification, what it was to have done the necessary thing and survived the consequences of it and come out the other side with the work still in her hands and the mechanism getting built and the floor full of patients who deserved someone paying close attention. That was the whole of it. Not glamorous, not clean, not the version where everything resolved without cost or bruising or the long, slow grind of institutional processes and legal timelines and 22 days of counting without meaning to. But complete. Genuinely and honestly complete. She got up, put on her running shoes, and went out into the evening for a different route than she had run before. Longer. One that went through the part of the city she hadn't explored yet. The part she'd been putting off seeing. The desert air was still warm from the day, the kind of warmth that held its heat until after dark, and then let it go all at once. She ran, not away from anything, not toward anything specific, just the forward motion of a person in a body that worked, in a city where she had stayed when staying was the harder thing, doing the simple physical fact of continuing. The city moved past her in the evening light. She had been the quietest person in the room for a long time.
She had been dismissed and managed and maneuvered and had absorbed it all with the patience of someone who knew, in the private architecture of herself, exactly what she was capable of. And when the moment had arrived, the real moment, the one with no more time and no more options, she had not hesitated. That was not something anyone had given her. It was not something that could be taken away. She ran until the light was gone and the city was all lit windows and the warm dark of a Nevada evening. And then she turned and ran back, breathing steady, hands loose, her shadow going ahead of her on the sidewalk and then falling behind and then going ahead again under each streetlight she passed. Forward. That was the direction. It always had been.